looking at the free agents the Giants did sign, Ben, is there anyone in particular that you're keeping your eye on that could be maybe a bigger impact than what people are just talking about when surrounding the Giants? Because I know you talked about Conforto and his upside, and I think if he was healthy last year and then entered free agency this year, like everyone's getting paid this offseason. Like him and Brandon Nemo are probably both getting $100 million contracts from the New York Mets. So is there one of those players that the Giants signed from this offseason that you're keeping your eye on that you think is a little under the radar that could pop for this team?
Well, I think first is probably Conforto, but I also believe Mitch Haniger. He has had some really good seasons, and he's been quote unquote injury prone. But if you look at some of the injuries he's had some very fluky injuries. Like I don't know if you know or the listeners know, he had a ruptured testicle on a foul ball that he hit. Yeah, rough, right? And he missed a lot of time with that, understandably so. And other kind of fluky things like that. But if you look at when he was healthy and when he kind of had a full season, he's been really good. And I mean, 39 home runs is kind of insane. But for him, it's going to come down to defense, because if you look at kind of the advanced metrics for him over his career, he's been up and down kind of defensively. And so if he can be healthy and then be the good defensive version of himself, I think that he's got the upside, I wouldn't say of a superstar, but of an all-star caliber player. And Michael Conforto, I mean, he averaged like 30 home runs over a 4-year period and on base percentages of like 370. So they both have the potential to be really good players, but also they have the potential to be mediocre players. And I think they probably lie somewhere in between where they're good, but not great, but not mediocre. And I don't know. On the pitching side, it's interesting because, last year, like you said, they bring in Rodon, who I knew immediately had the upside to be like an ace. And what they do this year with Stripling and Manaea, I don't think either of those two are kind of those types of pitchers. They're more like contact-oriented pitchers. And I don't think they're going to have that Cy Young type season that Rodon was able to have. But they finally have some young guys beating down the door a little bit in Kyle Harrison. I know the D-backs have even more young studs on the way, but the Giants have their own, maybe one or two, and you're probably going to see Kyle Harrison at some point this year. And I know that wasn't really the question, but he's a guy to look out for as well. Taylor Rogers, he's been a good reliever. I don't know. For me, it's the offensive players. They need one of Haniger or Conforto to kind of go off. I think that would be a key to this season.
No Sean Manaea? No Sean Manaea talk for you? Are you out on Sean Manaea?
Look at what he did last year. I'm a little bit tempering my expectations. I know he was good, but when he's been good, he's not like a dominant strikeout artist like Rodon was. He's more like an average strikeout rate and just kind of get really good results without being that blow people away type of pitcher. Although reportedly in his first spring start, he was up to 96, whereas last year at this time he was like 88, 90. So
that's a big jump.
It is. And they've had, Alex Cobb was the same thing last year. He's normally historically been a guy who throws like 91. And last year he was up to like 98 at times. And so they've sent guys to Driveline up in Seattle, and guys have been able to add velocity. So we'll see if that translates for Manaea. It certainly could. If you're going from low 90s to mid to upper 90s, that can make a big difference.
Yeah, it sounds like you sent these guys to biogenesis and you added 8 ticks of velocity your fastball in the offseason. Sounds like you're pretty insane. I don't know what kind of training you got to do to add that much raw power on your fastball, but might have to go see A-Rod's guys real quick. But looking ahead, I mean, just because looking at your lineup right now, I definitely think you need a Haniger or a Conforto to pop, because Peterson had a pretty nice year last year. He had a pretty under the radar season. I think he was even an all-star for you guys last year. And then Yastrzemski, he's already hurt, I think. Said he's day-to-day just on RotoChamp.
Just a little knee thing, yeah.
Yeah, he's solid, but he's not like a star player or anything like that. Like, he's just like one of those complimentary glue guys that every playoff lineup rotation needs. So I definitely think you need a Haniger or Conforto or both of them to pop for your lineup to really produce offensively, because I want to get a little D-backs talking here, because leaving your lineup, your third baseman, who might have been injured the last couple of years, but was pretty productive when he was on the field. Evan Longoria, as a D-backs fan, because I don't think we've talked about him yet, Ben. How should us D-backs fans feel about Evan Longoria? Obviously, he's old. Obviously, he's like 37. He's not the same elite defender as he once was, but I'm like, hey, you get 90 to 110 games out of Evan Longoria. You're just going to use him as your platoon third baseman to crush left-handed pitchers, which I think he can still do at a pretty high level. Like, as a D-backs fan, my expectations aren't high for Evan Longoria, but should I have them even lower? Should my expectations be on the floor, Ben?
I think you pretty much nailed it. Like everything you said was what I was going to say. The first thing I was going to say is he's old. Like you kind of see the age at times. I think he fits the D-backs a lot better in that the D-backs have a young team. And so to mix in a veteran like Evan Longoria, I think is a really nice thing to do. But for the Giants, I mean, he was like one of the core guys of that team. And I just thought it was time to turn the page and try to get a little bit younger, more like the D-backs in that regard. But you nailed it. I mean, I think he's going to platoon. He's going to hit left-handed pitching. I would say that, he was there for 5 years in San Francisco. And the first couple of years, it was a, Bruce Bochy-led coaching staff. And then Gabe Kapler comes in. They do a totally new coaching staff, new hitting coaches, 3 hitting coaches. And they went off offensively in 2020. Obviously, short season. People were wondering, can they do it again? Longoria was one of those guys who just hit a lot better after a couple down years. But in 2021, they did it again. And if you look at Longoria's seasons, I don't have them pulled up in front of me, but he was much better offensively after working with these new kind of more modern hitting coaches. And so I think he's a guy I really felt like should probably be platooned. And he wasn't always here. He played a lot against righties as well. But if you're just platooning him, I do think defensively he's still good. I mean, he's really kind of steady. He's really smooth. He's really under control. And he's just a guy that players gravitate to leadership-wise. And obviously he's been in the game a long time. He's even kind of a borderline Hall of Fame player, not because of his time with the Giants, but his time before that. And I don't know, like the deal reflects kind of the upside and the limited upside, but also just a solid piece on a young team to kind of provide that veteran leadership and also do a good job in a somewhat limited role defensively and hitting lefties.
Yeah, and last year, you just look at his numbers, like he missed some time with injury, played 89 games. But if we get a 767 OPS and 14 home runs out of Evan Longoria, like if he just duplicates what he did with the Giants last year for the D-backs, like I think that's all the value we need. We just need him to split time at third with Josh Rojas and just bang some dingers when you get a hanging curveball over the middle from a lefty. That's all we need. I think Evan Longoria can definitely do that. Already has a house here in Arizona. I think he was already inching his way toward Arizona maybe before. He was like, let me do a quick stop in San Fran, get some sunshine, hit the beach for a little bit, and then retire in AZ.
He said that. He said it towards the end of the year. Like people were asking him about his future, and he basically said, "I want to come back to the Giants, but also if that doesn't happen, I probably want to play for the D-backs where I have a house,
Really?
or I want to play for the Tampa Bay Rays where I have a house because he obviously started his career there. So yeah, he wants to be there. So that's part of it too. He's happy to be close to home. He has kids, or at least one, and he wants his family wants him to see him keep playing at least one more season where the kid is a little older and can experience his dad being a, major league player close to home.
And free agents wanting to come to Arizona, that's a rarity there. Don't always have that. And it's probably because we don't want to pay them what they're worth. But happy to see Evan Longoria come. I think he's going to be a nice veteran presence for this young team. But Ben Kaspick, I want to know, just because the Giants finished with a perfect 500 record last season, 81-81. We talked about how Carlos Rodon had just left this offseason. We talked about their whiffs, but listen, I do think they brought in quality players, maybe not of the Carlos Correa caliber, but I don't hate the Hanigers and the Confortos and the Ross Striplings of the world. I think those are solid players. So entering this season, do you think the ceiling is higher or lower than the Giants compared to last year's team?
That's tough. I think the ceiling might be lower, but I think the floor is higher.
I think that's a good answer. Why? Do you mostly think it's because Rodon with his that won't come in? Yeah, I feel that.
I feel like it's Rodon because he had the potential to be a Cy Young caliber player, and he was, but so many other things didn't go right But if you had like the floor of this year's team with like kind of that upside, that's why it was so seemingly important to get whether it was Correa or Judge or even Rodon. I didn't think they were going to go out and get Rodon or bring him back because of what we just talked about with pitchers and all that. But if you add some serious upside, like serious upside type players to this team with such a high floor, I do think that's how you really pop off and win 90 plus games and just kind of have a lot of things go your way. But this year's team, they have a lot of depth. I just kind of see them being able to sustain injuries and all that kind of stuff. And but I don't know. It's hard to say. Like it's hard to put a cap on a ceiling because the 2021 Giants won 107 games without Rodon and without some of the quality veterans we've discussed today. So any team can kind of pop off and have a miracle season. But realistically, I think we're looking at a mid 80s win team ish. And when the true talent is there, you could win 90, you could win 80, but somewhere in that range.
How do you think the Giants organization and front office views this team and their outlook? Or do you think they're just going to the season trying to be another 500 type-ish team? Or do you think they have real expectations of going in there, maybe winning 90 plus games and making some noise in the playoffs? Or is just this like just a retooling year and maybe trade a couple of these guys at the deadline, like a Brandon Crawford who's getting a little older?
I think there's a lot of pressure to win now, even if I'm not going to say it doesn't make sense. I think that makes sense. Basically, there's a lot of pressure to win now because they've made the playoffs exactly one time since 2016, and that was 2021. And this is not the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Kansas City Royals or the Oakland A's. This is a bigger market team. And I could have said the D-backs, but I didn't.
Wow. Okay.
I'm sorry. The D-backs, they do things they do things well, and they're on the up and up. So
we're gonna have a wager at the end of this podcast for the listeners. So you keep talking your ish right now because it'll be okay.
Right. But the Pirates, I think, is a good example, like where it's kind of tolerable or expected almost to go through multiple losing seasons and kind of rebuild that way. But this is a team that expects to win year in and year out. And they had the 2021 season, but going back, regressing to 81 last year, this is the 5th year of this new front office. And the contract was for 5 years for Farhan Zaidi taking over president of baseball operations. And we have not heard about an extension, although there's kind of hints that he may have been extended already. But the fans are restless. I don't know if you know this, but Giants fans are very, very, very restless right now, I think, about the state of the team. The farm system, you may have noticed, like in some rankings, is not up where I think people thought they would be at this point. But yeah, I do not think it's a retooling year at all. I think the expectation is to win, but they're kind of fringe, and so they may have to make another big deadline acquisition like they did in 2021 with Chris Bryant if they're kind of borderline at that point and they want to make that big splash that pushes them over the top. But I think they're better than people think, but also it's a competitive National League. Right away, you've got the Dodgers, the Padres, the Mets, and the Braves accounting for 4 of your 6 playoff spots most likely. And then there's really a race for 2 more spots. And you've got some other good teams like the Phillies and the Brewers, and the D-backs are in that mix. And the Cardinals, obviously. So I think it's going to be a competitive league in the race in the National League this year. And the D-backs are a big part of that. They could disrupt a lot of people's plans if they hit on kind of their upside.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about D-backs versus Giants in 1 second, but I got one more question before we get there, because after seeing the Giants this offseason, at least try and go out there and spend money on the Aaron Judges, give him potentially $300 to $400 million and give Carlos Correa $300+ million. Do you think in future offseasons going forward, the Giants will be big-time players for these big-time free agents? Because, listen, this upcoming offseason is going to be one of the most talked about ones, with maybe the best free agent of all time in Shohei Ohtani. Do you see the Giants as a team that will also get into that market, or do you think they will just the bidding will be too high because you're probably going to have to start at like $450 over 10 years for Ohtani? Do you think the Giants are a team that would be willing to get into that kind of expensive bidding?
I think they would. I mean, they did it. They did it with Aaron Judge and Carlos Correa. It wasn't 450, but if that's what he's worth, then I think that they're going to pursue it, especially because of everything we've heard about Ohtani preferring to play on the West Coast. I don't know if that's totally true. I know it was true when he was first, considering teams to sign with, and he had those finalists, and the Giants were one of those finalists back then in 2017, 2018. Coming off a 98 loss season, they were still considered a finalist. And so if there's some kind of preference to be on the West Coast and you're a team that needs stars and you've got this money to spend, they tried to also sign Harper several years ago. So they've been trying to go big game hunting here with some stars, and they just haven't come away with one. But I don't see any reason they're just going to sit on the sidelines for Shohei Ohtani. The one exception, and I keep bringing this up on my show, is he's half a pitcher, and we're, as I just got done talking about, they're hesitant to give a 5-year deal to Kevin Gausman, and so I wonder how that factors in to their thinking, if at all, when you consider that Shohei Ohtani is, if you're talking about a 10, 11, 12-year deal for this guy, ultimately, are you willing to break your own seeming rule about giving a long-term deal to someone who is partially a pitcher? So, and Machado was another guy who made sense, but he's not on the board anymore. It's really Shohei Ohtani and then a huge drop off. So it's going to be fascinating. And I think the Giants will be in the mix, but am I confident they'll come away with him? No.
I think when you look at like the long-term Ohtani contract, you have to be like, all right, I'm getting like 4 to 5 years of pitching and then like 10 years of hitting. And then you have to kind of figure out what number you're okay with. I feel like for Ohtani contract, you probably want to front load that thing so you could pay him while he's both a pitcher and hitter, because by the time he's like 34, 35, he's probably going to slow down the pitching and still be one of the best sluggers in Major League Baseball, which is just a crazy statement to say. But I want to get to the finale of this podcast, Ben, because I've been doing research. I've been looking at the teams on paper, the rotation, the lineup, the bullpen. And my conclusion is I think the D-backs on paper have a higher ceiling, maybe a lower floor than the Giants, because I do agree the Giants have very good depth, but I'm picking the D-backs to finish ahead of the Giants in the standings this year. I think the D-backs are being completely overlooked, at least on FanDuel, because if you look at like the division odds to win the division, of course, I don't think the D-backs are going to win the division. But the fact that the Giants are like plus 1,100 to win the division, then the D-backs are like plus 4,000 to win the division, I think that disparity is so crazy to me. And I think the D-backs are actually better than the Giants entering this season. How do you feel about our D-backs versus Giants rivalry this season?
I feel like we've had this conversation before, and then at times it has played out where it's been pretty close, I think. And at times the Giants have gone on to win 107 and the D-backs have like fallen apart. But okay. I feel that this year, again, I agree with you. We often agree that these teams are closer than people think. I agree with you 100%. That disparity on FanDuel, I would bet on the D-backs probably if I saw that. I mean, like I said, I don't think they're winning the division either, but
yeah, they're just better if you want to make money.
But like, yeah, so if everything goes right for the D-backs, it's not hard to see. And the Giants, like, they don't hit their upside, but they just kind of have their floor and are solid. But the D-backs have the potential, if they hit on their upside, to surpass the Giants. But I mean, I honestly think they could do it. Maybe the pitching maybe isn't quite there for me when I look at some of the guys, but I don't exactly know how these young guys who you've got coming up are going to factor in, and that makes a big difference. If obviously Corbin Carroll has arrived, but you've got like 3 other guys by many publications who are like top 15 prospects in the game, and a lot of them are close to the major leagues. And so if those guys come up and reach their potential, then this team could be really, really good. And yeah, so I agree with you. I think I'd have the Giants ahead, so we disagree there. But I think I agree in that I respect the upside and the young talent coming for Arizona.
Yeah, the D-backs are going to be a huge wild card just because of what you said. All the young talent that they're going to have like maybe 2 rookies in that rotation. They're going to have Corbin Carroll, who's a rookie, Jake McCarthy. He had like a half season with the D-backs last year. Like, this D-backs team is so young. It's going to be so inexperienced, but they got such good upside with so many of those young players that I just think the ceiling is going to be higher than the Giants, and that all those young players, I think, are going to, because with the new rule changes too, I think it's just going to affect the D-backs, just because this D-backs team has so much speed on it. I think speed is going to be like a major factor for teams this year. That's like my big proclamation, which I don't think is like some outlandish take or whatever, with the bigger bases, the pitch clock, and the only 2 pickoff attempts per plate appearance. I think steals and speed is going to be a major factor and weapon this season for MLB teams. I think the D-backs might be the greatest benefactor of that rule change. And so, Ben, since you believe the Giants are going to finish ahead of the D-backs in the standings, would you officially like to make a wager on this podcast on who's going to finish higher? We don't have to come up with the details, but would you like to bet on which team will finish higher in the standings?
I absolutely would, because I'm not just, playing to the camera. I think that the Giants are better, and you think the D-backs are better, but I think it's interesting. So yeah, I think that I'm happy to do so.
And I can't lie, I'm always biased whenever I talk about the teams I love. It's just so hard. I try to be impartial, but it's so hard to not just feel emotionally wrapped up when you have to cover these teams and talk about them every day. It's like, I just want to see the D-backs be successful. It's so hard to not pour my emotions into it as well. So it's always a little bit of wishful thinking when you do these kind of bets. But we'll have to probably announce on Twitter, maybe talk after the show about what kind of details should be going into this season-long bet. Maybe we'll announce it right before the start of the season. But there will be a wager, listeners. There will be a bet between Ben Kaspick and I, Locked On Giants versus Locked On Diamondbacks. Ben, before we go today, any parting words?
Well, I just wanted to say, when you mentioned speed and athleticism and that it even ratchets up in importance this year, I don't know if you remember, but I remember very well. The Diamondbacks were a major problem for the San Francisco Giants last year, precisely because of their speed and athleticism. And it just, like, the Giants matched up so poorly with Arizona last year. And so I wonder, like, somehow the rest of the league had an okay time with the D-backs, but the Giants, I mean, they couldn't hit Merrill Kelly. That was a whole other thing. That guy dominated the San Francisco Giants last year. And so, when I talk about moving on from Evan Longoria, the Giants also moved on from Brandon Belt. These were guys who are just veterans dealing with injuries all the time and like slow. And so hopefully, I think for me this year, the Giants are going to be it's not going to be such a stark comparison, but yes, the D-backs have that, and fans of the Giants saw that firsthand. And if you can do that to the rest of the league and just kind of impose your will athletically and with speed, it's exciting. It's a fun brand of baseball, and we saw how it can work when the Giants were playing the D-backs last year. That's my final thought.
Yeah, Giants were 9-10 against the D-backs last season, so it's not like we mollywhopped you guys. We're like, if there was one more game, we probably would have been 10-10 against each other. Perfect 500 record against each other, because we're pretty evenly matched.
What was the D-backs total record though?
The D-backs was 74 and whatever, like 88, whatever losses that is.
Yeah, and it was the nature of a lot of those losses, like the way that the D-backs won was just like athleticism and speed, and just the Giants had no answer for it when they were getting beat. And I think towards the end of I think the Giants swept in the end of the season, and so the D-backs had I think the Giants swept in their final series, but so I think before that it was, I guess, 6-10. No, I can't do math while doing a podcast.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at it now. The D-backs actually won the last 2 series against the Giants. So we actually we had a walk-off.
It must have been the Rockies.
Yeah, last game, D-backs versus Giants. D-backs walked it off actually for the win. So that was a pretty nice feeling. Yeah, the Rockies you swept in that last series. You guys destroyed the Rockies. You guys were like 15-5 against the Rockies last season. You guys absolutely guys. But I do want to ask you, actually, before we go today, Ben, just real quick, you could give me however long, it could be a 1-minute answer. You could take another 10 minutes if you want. Just give me your quick thoughts on the pitch clock.
Okay.
It
seems a little bit fast, but from what I understand, the first week in the minor leagues when they tested it out, there were like 1.7 violations per game or something. And the first week of spring training, there's like 1.7 violations per game. But by I think a month into the year in the minor league season where they were using this, they were down to half a violation per game. And so players get used to it. And so I think if you're watching spring training right now and it seems rushed and there's a lot of violations, relatively speaking, that's because it takes time to get used to it. And Look, I was a purist. I was adamantly against the DH coming to the NL. I was adamantly against the pitch clock. I was adamantly against banning or restricting shifts. But the pitch clock, I think, is going to end up being one of the best things to happen to baseball in a long time because the guys just take too long to get into the box. Not every one of them, and to pitch, just and to new fans, young fans, like in the modern world, just you turn on a game and a lot of people just see what are they doing? They're just standing there and they're not doing anything. And just you're not losing any action. You're simply losing time between the action. And so it feels a little bit rushed. Like I'm okay maybe thinking about adding a couple seconds to the clock perhaps, but just the idea of it, once they get used to it, you won't notice it as much. People will just play at a better pace. And I think right now, give it time when the players adjust and you see a violation only one time every 2 games that you watch versus, multiple violations per game. I think if you're violating multiple times a game, it's too much. But ultimately, I think it's going to be great because the pace is important and it had slowed down too much. I want to hear your thoughts. I have to know.
Yeah, I am totally in on the pitch clock. I am in on anything that leads to offensive production, more action, or just the efficiency, like you said, between the action, because a lot of pushback is from either old generation claiming, oh, this new age, the microwave generation, they go on TikTok for 10 seconds and they have no attention span. Yes, part of that is true. I won't deny new generation people have a shorter attention span than the people of yesterday. But also, you can't deny the fact that baseball games are getting increasingly longer with no added action, because you look at the average time of baseball games the last 5 years, they've been over 3 hours. I think in 2021 or 2020, the average length of a baseball game was like 3 hours and 10 minutes long. The peak of baseball was the steroid era, the 80s and 90s. Back then, a baseball game on average was between 3 hours and 35 minutes, or not 3 hours, 2 hours and 35 minutes and 2 hours and 45 minutes. And if you go back further, the further you go back in baseball, the shorter times were. In the 50s and 60s, games were under 2.5 hours. Those things were like 2 hours and 20 minutes long. So we've added so much time over the years without getting better offensive production. You would think the offense would be getting better at the same time. Maybe that would lead to the increase in the games being longer, but part of it's pitchers are getting better. They're striking out more, so at bats are longer. But if we're not getting more action and these games are longer, it's like we need to figure out a way to condense the action. I think the fact that we're getting a pitch clock, we're banning the shift, we're getting the pickoff attempts lessened. Like, I love the idea of games flying by because me and you, we're West Coast guys. Every game we watch starts at 7:10. And guess what? Some of those games with the extra innings go until midnight. And I don't want to be recording post-game podcast after 11, after midnight. So the idea of a game starting at 7:10 and then ending at like 9:30, it's just really appealing to me as a baseball podcast host.
And you don't miss any action. It's the same number of outs, same number of innings. You're literally just missing the time when the batter steps out, readjusts his glove, looks at batting gloves, looks at the sky, steps up, pitcher steps off, blah, 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 all that stuff. And again, once the players get used to it, it'll just be played at a crisper pace. And so I think people are it's one of those things, people just don't like change. And I think it's one of those things where people are going to realize this is what happened in the minors, including players, former major leaguers like Matt Carpenter, was in the minor leagues last year. And he said initially he hated it. And then it did not take him long. And then he said, I love it. And so I think that's what we're going to see. Fans are going to realize it's good for the game. Players are going to realize it. I think we're already seeing it. I feel like there's always going to be naysayers, but it's going to be one of the best changes we've made in a long time to the sport.
Yeah, I think over the next 3 to 5 years, baseball is going to kind of make a comeback into the national talking audience, just because the pace of play, like we just talked about, we're going to get robo umps. Like, once games are like 2.5 hours long, with way more action between pitches, with the less complaining between every pitch, every ball and strike, just seeing a clean executed game. Maybe you got to replay every now and then for the safe, calling somebody safe route. But I just think we're going to get so much more efficient action, get so much more efficiency from balls and strikes. I just think the game is going to be so much better. We're going to get so much more offense with the band shift. I love the direction baseball is moving, because so long it was stuck in its ways, and now it's finally seeing the world of evolution. I love it. Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants, where can the listeners find you on social media?
On Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. Pretty active on there, tweeting out a bunch of stats and what have you about the Giants, and it's a lot of fun. So check me out there. And where can my listeners find you?
Yeah, at Creative Thomas 24 for the personal account, or just look up Locked On Diamondbacks about Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle on all your podcasting streaming platforms. And please hit both of our YouTube channels with a subscribe, Locked On Diamondbacks and Locked On Giants. Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants will come out with our little wager details probably right before the season starts, but very excited to see a little bet between our two teams because I'm really in on the D-backs this year, and I hope they don't disappoint. Ben, thank you for joining today, sir.